I was 20 years old when my parents looked me straight in the eye and said, "We won't pay your college tuition. You don't deserve it." My name is Jessica. That same week, my twin sister Camille and I had both been accepted into Westbrook's data science program. I remember running into the kitchen, phone in hand, my acceptance letter glowing on the screen. My parents barely looked up. Then Camille's phone dinged. She'd gotten in too. Suddenly the room lit up. My mom jumped to her feet, hugging her like she'd won a medal. My dad beamed with pride. For her, not for me. I stood there clutching my letter, invisible. Later that night, I tried again. Tuition, housing, next steps. My mom sighed like I was asking for something extravagant. My dad didn't even glance away from his laptop. "We've decided to use the college fund for Camille," he said. I reminded them we were twins, accepted into the same program. But my mom called Camille more consistent, and my dad's words cut like glass. "You don't deserve it, not the way she does." It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. But instead of crying, I opened a blank document and started searching scholarships, grants, loans, anything. If they thought I'd fold, they didn't know me at all. 2 years later, just as I was starting to breathe on my own, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find my parents standing there, pale and shaken. "Jessica," my mom whispered, "we need to talk. It's about Camille. If you've ever felt betrayed by the very people who should have been your biggest supporters, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, comment it, and subscribe to Family Power Stories." When they told me I didn't deserve it, the words didn't just sting in the moment. They echoed in everything that followed. It was like a label they'd glued to my forehead. Unworthy. I kept telling myself maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe I was overreacting. But the next day, when Camille's acceptance letter was all over social media with 30 hashtags and a glowing caption, I knew. My parents commented with heart emojis, shared it like it was breaking news. Mine? I didn't even get a conversation. I can still picture that dinner table. Camille laughing, twirling pasta around her fork, basking in their pride. My mom leaned forward, eyes sparkling, asking her about dorm decorations. My dad chimed in, talking about financial aid packages as if there was any question, except there wasn't. They had already decided. It was Camille's future they were investing in. Me? I sat there pushing peas around my plate, invisible. When I finally forced the topic, my mom sighed so loudly it cut the air. "Jessica, we need to be honest with you." She folded her napkin with this kind of delicate precision, like honesty required neat corners. Then came the verdict. No tuition, no fund, no support. My dad didn't even look up from his laptop. He just said it flat. "You don't deserve it." It wasn't just the words. It was the ease with which they said them, like they'd rehearsed, like my fate was already sealed. That night, I sat in my room staring at the acceptance letter until the words blurred. I didn't cry. Crying would have felt like proof of everything they accused me of, that I was fragile, unreliable, soft. Instead, I clenched my fists under the desk until my nails dug half moons into my palms. I opened a blank document and typed, "Scholarships for data science majors." The silence in that house was the loudest I'd ever heard. When move-in day came, Camille got the full send-off. New bedding, a trunk full of snacks, dad carrying boxes, mom snapping photos for Facebook, me. I hauled 2 duffel bags onto a bus to Aunt Mel's tiny apartment. My parents didn't help me pack. They didn't even say goodbye. All I got was a text. "Good luck. Make smart choices." Aunt Mel met me at the station with a hug and a grocery bag of snacks. "You can crash on the pullout," she said, smiling like it was a gift. It was lumpy, smelled faintly of old fabric softener, and creaked when I turned over. But it was mine. That first night, listening to her neighbor's curry leaking through the walls, I thought, they really meant it. They're not going to help me at all. The contrast followed me everywhere. Camille posted photos from her glossy dorm, walls covered in string lights, friends lined up in matching shirts. I had a couch that folded into a question mark and a laptop that overheated if I opened more than 3 tabs. She had a monthly allowance. I had a pile of student loan forms and a stack of part-time job applications. Mornings, I pulled espresso shots in a cafe that smelled like burnt beans and almond milk. Between classes, I reshelved books in the library, my hands dry from endless paper dust. Weekends, I wore a headset at a call center, apologizing to angry strangers for outages I couldn't fix. At night, I spread textbooks across Aunt Mel's coffee table and studied until my vision blurred. Westbrook was brutal. The program had a reputation for weeding people out early, and I was surrounded by classmates with MacBooks, tutors, and parents who paid their rent. I coded on a borrowed Chromebook, trying to ignore the ache in my back from that lumpy pullout. Sometimes I saw Camille across campus. She was always surrounded by people, laughing on the quad, sipping bubble tea, her hair curled just right. She never looked my way, neither did I. Pretending we were strangers was easier than acknowledging the gulf that had opened between us. Still, I worked harder than I'd ever worked for anything. Front row in every lecture, office hours even when I didn't have questions. I needed professors to know I was serious, that I wasn't just surviving but clawing my way forward. But survival has a cost. By the second year, my scholarships shrank, my loans grew, and exhaustion lived in my bones. I carried it into every shift, every exam, every sleepless night. Aunt Mel never complained, though I knew I was stretching her patience. I caught her sometimes, rubbing her temples after paying bills, and guilt clawed at me. So I tried something else. A grad student needed help cleaning up a data set. Then someone else wanted scraping scripts. Then a local business asked for customer insights. I didn't know the first thing about pricing, but I knew how to work. What started as side gigs became steady clients. By spring, I had a website. By summer, I filed taxes as a sole proprietor. For the first time, I handed Aunt Mel rent money. She laughed and bought me a futon. "If you're staying, at least don't wake up shaped like a question mark." That futon felt like a throne. Later, I moved into a tiny top-floor studio. No elevator, drafty windows, but it was mine. That first night, I sat cross-legged on the floor with a paper cup of noodles and finally let myself breathe. No handouts, no safety nets, just me. Meanwhile, Camille's life looked like a highlight reel. Designer bags, weekend trips, glossy photos that made her look untouchable. Our parents were still wiring her money every month, no questions asked. She was still their golden child. I thought I'd escaped it, that I could live my life quietly on the other side of the divide. But one Wednesday night, just as I microwaved leftover stir-fry, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I froze. My parents stood there, pale and stiff, like ghosts who had forgotten how to smile. "Jessica," my mom said, her voice tight, "we need to talk. It's about Camille." And just like that, the wound they'd carved open years before split wide again. When my parents showed up at my door after 2 years of silence, pale and stiff, saying, "It's about Camille," something inside me snapped. They weren't here for me. They were here because their golden child had cracked. I let them talk. I stayed in the doorway of my tiny studio, arms crossed, the microwave humming behind me. Mom's voice trembled. Camille hadn't answered calls, hadn't been home, hadn't paid rent. Dad unfolded a notice from his coat, edges soft from being handled too many times. Final warning, overdue balance, immediate payment required. I read it twice. The number stared back, blunt and cold. "I thought you were covering her rent," I said. "We were," Dad muttered. "We sent money every month." "You assumed she was paying it," I finished. The words came out flat, familiar, like we were replaying a bad scene with the same ending. They kept searching my face for a softness I no longer offered. "You could still help," Mom said. "She might respond to you." I laughed. It sounded strange in that small room, a short, dry break in the air. "You mean the sister you chose over me? The one you funded while I worked 3 jobs? Now you want me to fix the mess you made?" Their faces froze. For once, I didn't swallow it. I let it sit. After they left, I ate my cold stir-fry standing at the counter, staring at the folded notice like it might change its own numbers. Outside, traffic hissed down the block. Inside, the apartment felt too quiet, just the router light blinking, steady and indifferent. "We're your family," they'd said. They stopped being mine the day they told me I didn't deserve the education I earned. The weeks that followed should have felt heavy. They didn't. Or they did. But the weight pressed me into motion, not into the floor. Work expanded to fill the space where old hope had lived. My small freelance gigs multiplied. A grad student passed my name to a startup drowning in messy CSVs. A neighborhood shop wanted churn analysis and customer segments. A friend of a friend needed scraping scripts with just enough resilience to survive brittle HTML. I taught myself to say, "This is my rate," and then to say it again when someone tried to bargain me down. I learned to invoice on time, to add late fees without apologizing. Each little boundary was a brick. After a while, I looked up and realized I'd built a wall between me and the version of myself who begged. I worked from a desk I'd found on the curb, legs uneven, shimmied with folded cardboard. The chair squeaked on every shift, complaining about the hours as much as my spine did. Most nights, the laptop's blue light cut a triangle across the peeling wall. I rubbed my eyes, ran scripts, cleaned data that had been touched by too many careless hands, and watched graphs settle into patterns that made sense. The first month I could pay Aunt Mel more than grocery money, I put an envelope on the counter. "For everything," I said. She slid it back with 2 fingers, smiling like she'd already planned to lose. "Only if I get to spend it on a proper futon," she said. "If I'm harboring a startup CEO, she shouldn't wake up bent like a pretzel." We bought the futon. It clicked open with a clean hinge and no complaint, a small, ridiculous luxury. It felt like a promotion. I didn't see Camille much. When I did, she was the center of a small solar system, loud, polished kids orbiting with designer totes and an ease I didn't recognize. She looked like a brochure. Good lighting, good hair, the exact right jacket for early fall. She never looked at me. I let us pass like strangers and didn't turn around. I told myself that was mercy. The invitation came from my mentor, a woman who'd looked at my messy code and saw something steadier underneath. "You're speaking," she said. "Small panel. You'll survive." Public speaking felt like standing under a light I hadn't asked for. I almost said no. But then I thought about that blinking router light in my apartment, the beat, beat, beat of a life I'd built out of stubbornness. And I said yes. On the day, I wore a thrifted blazer and shoes that looked better than they felt. Backstage, my hands shook. When I peeked out, I saw a dozen rows of folding chairs, the polite murmur of people waiting to be impressed. Third row, 2 familiar silhouettes. I forgot how to breathe for half a second. Then I remembered. In, out. I walked to the lectern. The first sentences scraped. Then they smoothed. I said the parts I'd never planned to say out loud. The futon, the espresso shifts, the headset apologies to strangers who hated me for outages I didn't cause. I told them about learning to charge what work was worth. I didn't talk about money like it was a miracle. I talked about agency, about designing my own days, choosing my own clients, deciding who I was without permission. When applause rose, my body realized I was done before my brain did. I stepped into the hallway, air cooler there, sound softer. Jessica. My name landed behind me. Mom stood clutching her bag like a shield. Dad had that careful, court-ready smile. Tight, presentable, hollow. "That was very impressive," he said. I waited. "We saw the article," Mom added, almost tripping on the word article like it might bite. It surprised us. I let the silence work. Then the story spilled. Camille had failed courses, wanted to switch majors, wanted to start over. The rent wasn't being paid. The money they sent went to trips and clothes and weekends that looked good in photos. They took out another loan. The mortgage was behind. They couldn't keep up. "And?" I asked. Dad inhaled like it hurt. "We're asking for help just until things stabilize." "You're serious?" "You're doing well," Mom said softly. "We're not asking for much. Just cover her tuition going forward, and maybe help with the house for a while." I laughed. It wasn't kind. "You're asking me to pay for the degree you wouldn't let me pursue, for the daughter you chose over me." "That's not fair," Dad snapped. "We did what we thought was right." "No," I said. "You did what was easy. You picked the daughter who smiled at dinner and wore the right clothes and reflected you back to yourselves. And now that she isn't who you imagined, you come to the one you cast out." Mom's face moved in small ways. Hurt, pride, calculation, like clouds crossing a sun that never actually comes out. "We're your parents," she said. "You were Camille's parents," I said. "I was just there." The words landed and stayed. They left without slamming anything. The hallway swallowed them. I expected the old ache to return after that, the one that made me check my phone for apologies that never came. It didn't. What came instead was a clear, thin line in my head, drawn in ink this time, not pencil. Years earlier, I would have blurred it, softened it, tried to make everyone comfortable. Now, I sharpened it. They would knock again, I could feel it, not because of love, not the kind that lets people become who they are, but because need is greedy, and I was done being a reservoir for someone else's drought. Back at my apartment, I sat on the edge of the futon and looked at what I had. The desk with the shimmied leg, the thrifted lamp with the warm bulb, the laptop sleeping with a soft exhale of fans. The router blinked. Steady. I thought about the girl who had opened a blank document and typed scholarships for data science majors with half moons pressed into her palms. I thought about the woman who had just told a room full of strangers that agency mattered more than approval. Somewhere between those two, a line had formed. I wasn't going to cross it for them. I turned off the lamp. The room slid into a soft gray. Out the window, a siren stitched the night for a moment and then let it go. The line stayed. And I had the feeling, bone-deep, unwelcome true, that it was about to be tested. The line I had drawn in my head felt solid, until it wasn't. A week after my parents' second visit, a cousin messaged me, "Your parents are behind on the mortgage. Camille's moved in with a friend. Things are messy." I stared at the screen, that single text pulling me back into a life I thought I'd cut away. My chest tightened. I wanted to delete it, pretend I hadn't seen it. But once you know, you know. Then came the Facebook post. A screenshot arrived in my inbox from someone I barely spoke to anymore. My mother's words, vague but sharp. Some children forget where they came from. Some turn their back when family needs them most. The comments dripped with sympathy. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years offering prayers. Distant relatives hinting that I should be ashamed. Shame. That old coat, heavy and familiar, slid back onto my shoulders before I could fight it off. At work, I tried to focus on cleaning datasets, on building the dashboards clients needed. But my fingers trembled on the keyboard. I reread lines of code until the characters blurred. Every time my email pinged, I braced for another reminder that I was the villain in their story. One night, I sat on the futon, laptop open, scrolling through the comments under my mother's post. Words like ungrateful and selfish stuck to me. My name wasn't there, but it didn't have to be. Everyone knew. The worst part? A small voice inside whispered, "Maybe they're right." After all, Camille was my sister. Blood. Twins. Even if we lived in different worlds, and here I was, saying no while she unraveled. I pressed my palms to my eyes until colors sparked behind my lids. I hated that I still wanted their approval, even after everything. The magazine article should have been a victory. It told my story in clean paragraphs and flattering photos. The student who lost her safety net, worked 3 jobs, and built a business from nothing. For a moment, I felt proud, until I realized my parents had seen it too. That's when the phone calls started. Unknown numbers, then blocked numbers, then messages from relatives repeating the same refrain. "They're struggling. You should help. You can afford it." Each buzz of my phone was another stone on my chest. I stopped sleeping. My code grew sloppy. Deadlines slipped. I stared at the graphs on my screen and couldn't remember what they meant. I felt myself sliding, the same way Camille had, only my collapse was quieter, lonelier. One evening, I found myself standing outside Aunt Mel's apartment again. The hallway smelled of curry and bleach, exactly as it had when I first moved in. She opened the door and pulled me into a hug before I said a word. "You don't have to explain," she said, pressing a cup of tea into my hands. But I did. The words poured out. About the article, the panel, my parents' visits, the Facebook post. About how I felt both guilty and furious, strong and small all at once. Aunt Mel listened. She always did. Then she set down her tea and looked me in the eye. "Jessica, you can't fix what they broke. You survived it. That's enough." Her words should have been a balm. Instead, they deepened the ache, because surviving didn't feel like enough anymore. The breaking point came at the panel's reprint. A bigger publication picked up the story, this time quoting my line about building without a safety net. Messages flooded in. Strangers thanked me. Young people with no family support said my story gave them hope. For the first time, I realized my pain could be more than just mine. It could be proof, a map for someone else. But the louder that chorus grew, the more bitter my parents became. Another cousin forwarded me a post. Mine seems... This one nastier, angrier. My mother, again, typing in all caps. It is easy to judge until you have been a parent. Some children take and give nothing back. I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse racing. It felt like I was drowning in two versions of myself, the survivor strangers saw and the ungrateful daughter my parents painted online. Which one was real? I paced the studio, heart hammering, until I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Hair unwashed, circles under my eyes, jaw clenched tight. I didn't look like either version. I just looked tired. That night, I collapsed onto the futon, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, tears came. Hot, relentless. I pressed my face into the pillow and let them soak through. Not because I felt weak, but because I finally couldn't hold it anymore. They had told me not to cry back then, that crying proved I was fragile, unworthy. But here I was, 22, running a business, standing on my own. And I was still crying over parents who would never see me. Maybe I hadn't escaped after all. Maybe I'd just built a new cage. Days blurred. I went through motions, calls, emails, client work. But inside I was unraveling. The line I'd drawn, the wall I thought I'd built, all of it felt like sand in my hands. I avoided looking at Camille when I passed her on campus. I didn't want to know how far she had fallen. I didn't want proof that maybe I was no better, just luckier. The worst thought came late one night, when exhaustion pressed down like a weight. What if they were right? What if I was selfish? What if refusing to help meant I was just as cruel as they had been? The question gutted me. For the first time, I wondered if I had gone too far in cutting them out. One afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Another message, another plea. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. It wasn't from my parents. It was from a stranger, a student who said she was working 3 jobs too, who said my story kept her going. I read it 3 times, the words swimming through my tears. And in that moment, I realized the choice waiting for me wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about who I was going to be in the face of everything they had done. But clarity doesn't erase pain. Because the next week, when I crossed campus and saw Camille sitting alone on the steps, head in her hands, makeup streaked down her cheeks, my stomach dropped. She looked up for just a second. Our eyes met. And in that moment, I knew the line I had drawn was about to be tested in a way I wasn't ready for. Camille's eyes on the campus steps haunted me for days. She had always been the glossy version of us, the polished smile, the golden child. Seeing her mascara streak down her cheeks cracked something in me, but before I could decide what to do, the storm came from another direction. The article. What started as a small feature in a student magazine had grown. A national outlet reprinted it, bold headline, my photo in cap and gown, the line they all loved, building without a safety net. My inbox exploded. Messages from strangers poured in, first-generation students, kids cut off by their families, young people working 2 or 3 jobs to survive. For the first time, my story wasn't just pain, it was power. But that power came with heat. My parents escalated. Another Facebook post, this one angrier, accusing me of being ungrateful, selfish, turning my back on family. Relatives whispered, neighbors gossiped, and somehow I became the villain in their version of events. I was tired of swallowing it. So I wrote back, not to them, not directly, but publicly. A single post, one photo, me in my cap and gown standing outside the university building where I never walked the stage. The caption was short, steady, accepted into the same program as my twin. My parents paid her tuition in full, told me I didn't deserve mine. I worked 3 jobs, crashed on a couch, and built a business from scratch. This isn't revenge, It's survival. I hit publish. The response was instant. Comments flooded in. Not pity, but solidarity. People shared their own stories of estrangement, of cutting ties with families who chose favorites. My words traveled farther than I ever expected. And just like that, the narrative shifted. When my parents came to find me again, it wasn't with quiet shame. It was with desperation. They showed up after another cousin had texted me that they'd lost the house. I didn't know whether to believe it until I saw them on my doorstep again. Dad looked older, lines carved deep into his face. Mom clutched her purse like a lifeline. "Jessica," she began, her voice almost breaking, "we've lost the house. Camille, she's working retail now. She barely speaks to us." I leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. I didn't move to let them in. Dad cleared his throat. "You're doing well now. You could help us get back on track, just until—" "No?" The word startled even me. Sharp, final. Dad's face darkened. "For someone who talks about being abandoned, you're doing a good job abandoning your own family." I didn't flinch. "You stopped being mine when you told me I didn't deserve the education you handed her on a silver platter." Silence. Heavy. Mom's eyes filled, but I held her gaze. "You thought I'd always need you," I continued. "But the truth is, I built a life without you. And now you've come, not out of love, but because you need something from me. I'm not your backup plan." Up. Dad's jaw worked, opening and closing like he still had a script he wanted to read. But the words never came. Finally, I stepped back and pointed to the hallway. "Good luck finding what you're looking for. It won't be me." They hesitated, then turned. Their footsteps echoed down the corridor until the building swallowed them whole. For days afterward, I waited for the regret to crush me. It didn't. What came instead was a strange calm, like the eye of a storm. I threw myself into work, but now it felt different. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about proving, to myself, not them, that I was more than the daughter they dismissed. When another magazine requested an interview, I said yes. When I was asked to speak on a youth entrepreneurship panel, I didn't hesitate this time. I stood under the bright lights, blazer sharp, voice steady, and told my story to hundreds of faces leaning in. I spoke of long nights, the futon, the jobs that barely covered textbooks, but I also spoke of the freedom that came after, the agency of building something on my own. People clapped, some stood, a few wiped tears. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was holding space for others like me. But the confrontation wasn't over. A week later, a distant cousin forwarded me yet another post from my mother. This one didn't just hint, it named me, said I had betrayed them, that I'd turned my back when they needed me most. Something in me snapped. I opened my laptop and typed, hands steady this time. I told the whole story. The acceptance letters, the dinner table where Camille got hugs while I got silence, the night they told me I didn't deserve the education I had earned, the bus ride to Aunt Mel's, the futon, the 3 jobs, the side hustle that became a business. I ended it simply, I'm not ungrateful. I'm alive because I refused to drown in their choices. And now that I'm standing, I'm building ladders for others, not bridges for those who watched me sink. I hit post. And then I closed the laptop, heart pounding. The next morning, it had gone viral. Messages from across the country, kids who said they finally felt seen, parents who admitted they were rethinking how they treated their own children, even strangers thanking me for telling a truth they hadn't had words for. Meanwhile, silence from my family. Not a call, not a text. Just silence. And for the first time, I realized I preferred it that way. Yet deep down, I knew the silence wouldn't last. Because people like my parents didn't vanish. They lingered, circling, waiting for another chance to rewrite the story. And when they came again, and I knew they would, I would be ready. Because this time, I wasn't just the girl on a futon, clawing her way through nights that felt endless. I was the woman who had stood in front of strangers and told the truth, the woman who had survived their rejection and turned it into fire. And that fire wasn't going out. Not for them, not ever. I never finished college. Neither did Camille, but the difference was everything. She dropped out because she couldn't keep up. I dropped out because I had already outrun the life they told me I didn't deserve. There's no ceremony for that. No cap tossed in the air, no family cheering in a stadium, just a quiet room, a laptop humming on a secondhand desk, and the realization that I had built something no one could take from me. For years, I thought walking away made me weak. I thought I'd always carry the label my parents gave me, unworthy. But standing in front of strangers, telling my story, hearing them clap, reading the messages from kids who saw themselves in me, it changed everything. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. So I did the one thing I wished someone had done for me. I gave back. I took part of my earnings and donated to a scholarship fund for first-gen students, for anyone cut off from family support. I didn't put my name on it. I didn't need to. The point wasn't recognition. It was making sure someone else could climb without the weight I carried. Word traveled. A cousin texted me. My parents had lost the house. Camille was living with a friend, working retail, barely speaking to them. For a moment, I stared at the screen, waiting for guilt to claw at me. It never came. Because I finally understood. Their choices weren't my burden. Their downfall wasn't my responsibility. My life was mine. Sometimes I still wonder, was I justified in cutting them off completely? Did I go too far? Maybe. But every time I think of that futon, the late nights coding while my hands shook from exhaustion, the silence when they told me I didn't deserve it, I know I chose survival. And survival turned into strength. If you've made it this far, maybe you see yourself somewhere in my story. Maybe you felt the sting of being overlooked, the weight of being told you weren't enough. If you have, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not defined by the people who failed to see your worth. You are defined by what you build anyway. So if my story resonated with you, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city, your state, or even your country in the comments. Let's see how far stories like ours can travel. And if you believe in giving strength to voices that were once silenced, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Family Power Stories. Every click helps us reach more people who might be sitting on their own futon tonight, wondering if they're worth it. I'm here to say, you are. Because I was told I didn't deserve it, and I built a life anyway. And I never looked back.